All right, so in this video, we are going to talk about the serializable interface and how to use binary files in order to write objects. So we're not going to go into a lot of detail because, again, this is not something you're going to do all that often. This is kind of an uncommon task in Java. We don't typically need to do this, but you might find use for it at some point. So again, we are going to be talking about writing and reading objects. Okay, so while we're doing that, we are going to talk about the serializable class. So serializable, it's not actually a class, it's an interface. So serializable. And anytime we want to use the serializable interface, because it's called an interface, we have to do that implements. So if we write our own class, for example, this would be something like public class, right? And then you're going to name your class, my class, and then you use that keyword implements, and you're going to say serializable. And what this is going to do is it's going to enable your object that you're writing to be written to the command line. Or not, sorry, not to the command line, to a binary data file. We're talking about binary data files, not command line. So this is going to allow you to write it to that binary data file we're talking about in the previous video. All right, so you don't actually have to do much with this. The serializable interface automatically does a lot, but for every instance variable, all right, for every instance variable, you have to have serializable interface implemented for its class. All right, so we'll just call this having a serializable class. All right, so all of our base data types in Java come ready with this. So if it's an integer, if it's a string, if it's anything like that, that's fine. You're good. You're ready to go. If you have any custom classes that are a part of that, not so good to go. You're going to have to do something about that. So serializable means that you have to make sure that they're all ready to go. They're all ready to be written. It's going to write the object data. All right. And when we write this, we're just going to write this very easily. There's a very simple way to do this. Let me flip to my reference here. So when we write a class out, we're just going to basically write the object. So the output stream that we talked about in the previous video, right? The output stream from the binary files is going to basically have a write object method. And when we want to call that, when we want to write an object, we're just going to put our object variable into that method. So it'll be something like write, so like something like out.write object. And then if our object was called, I don't know, my object, right? This is all we would do in order to write that out. Keep in mind, you still need to call an out.flush or close in order to actually write it. Oh, it thought that one was a circle. I don't want that. All right. So write.out. So you write the object. So out.write object with your object name, and then out.flush. That's going to write it to that file that you have for the output stream. All right, so the next thing is about reading them. When you read them in, you have to cast. So you're going to have a method, which is you're going to do your same normal input stream that you did before with the binary files. It helps if I don't hit the erase button when I'm trying to write. Um, so if you do a read, you're going to use the read object, just like I mentioned before about there being an equivalent read to every write. There is one for this as well. So write object, read object, and you're going to do something very similar to what you were seeing before with the read. The difference here is so you have your input stream. So let's say we have an in, change my color here. So let's say we had an input stream that was just called in, and we had a read object method, which we do have a read object method. It's going to look something like this. Now, the problem is when you read it, it doesn't actually know what kind of object it's reading in. It knows it's reading in an object, but it doesn't know what kind it is. So what you have to do is you have to cast it. So let's say that my object was of type my class. You have to cast it explicitly using that my class. All right. And then you're going to store it as whatever variable or whatever that you want to store it as. That's fine. But you have to cast it when you read it in. Now, this is true for objects that you write or objects that Java writes. So if you implement a class that's like my class that uses serializable, that's great. You still have to do this. If you use one of Java's classes that have serializable, that's great. You still have to do this casting. That includes things like arrays. So if you write an array to a binary file, you have to cast it when it comes back in. That is a really important aspect of this, and there's more information about exactly how that casting works through that binary serializable interface section of your textbook, which starts on page 630 and moves on to basically 634. Okay, so that's page 630 to 634. Really talk about this and talk about using those different casting options. The array has a good example on page 6 from 634 through 636. It's kind of long because there's a lot of exceptions. So I'm actually going to change this number here from 34 to 36 because that's going to be a useful reference for you. There's a really good example in there exactly how to use this and why it would be useful. So make sure that if this is something you want to do, that you're doing it properly, you're casting when you read in, and that when you write out, it's just very simple. You have to use that serializable interface. All right, that's it for this lecture series. So I will have more videos for you next week, and hopefully this answers all of your questions about reading and writing files in Java. If any of this was not clear or you didn't like this presentation style, please let me know. I will take all of your feedback into consideration moving forward.